The wind howled across the barren wasteland, carrying with it the scent of rust and decay. The sky was a dull gray, streaked with faint traces of orange from a dying sun. In the distance, the remains of ancient battles littered the ground, shattered ships, broken weapons, and the bones of those who had fought and fallen long ago. It was a place forgotten by time, a graveyard of forgotten wars. A small group of scavengers moved cautiously through the ruins, their boots crunching against the cracked earth. They were a rough-looking bunch, dressed in patched-up suits and carrying tools for stripping valuable parts from the wreckage. Their leader, an older man with a face lined by years of hardship, walked at the front. His name didn't matter, what mattered was the look in his eyes, a mix of weariness and determination. He had seen too much in his life, lost too much, and now all he cared about was survival. "Over here," one of the scavengers called out, his voice echoing across the empty landscape. The group hurried over, their footsteps quickening as they spotted something unusual. In the center of a massive crater lay a humanoid figure, half buried in the dirt. It was a machine, but unlike any they had ever seen. Its body was sleek and metallic, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. Its face was smooth and featureless, except for two eyes that flickered with a soft, blue light. The older man knelt beside the machine, his breath catching in his throat. He reached out to touch it, but hesitated, as if afraid it might come to life. "What is this thing?" one of the scavengers asked, his voice trembling. "Some kind of war machine?" The older man didn't answer. He was too busy studying the symbols on the machine's chest. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, ancient and alien, yet somehow familiar. As he stared at them, the machine's eyes suddenly flared to life, and a low, mechanical voice filled the air. "I am not what you think I am." The scavengers jumped back, their hands reaching for their weapons. But the machine didn't move. It simply lay there, its eyes glowing brighter as it repeated the same phrase. "I am not what you think I am." The older man stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen many strange things in his life, but nothing like this. The machine's voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was something about it that sent a chill down his spine. "What are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The machine didn't answer. Instead, it slowly began to rise, its movements smooth and deliberate. The scavengers backed away, their weapons trembling in their hands. But the older man stood his ground, his eyes locked on the machine's glowing gaze. "Wait," he called out as the machine turned to leave. "Where are you going?" The machine paused, its head tilting slightly as if considering the question. Then, without a word, it began to follow the scavengers, its footsteps silent against the cracked earth. The older man didn't know what to make of it. Was it a threat? A protector? Or something else entirely? As they made their way back to the settlement, the older man couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to change forever. The machine's words echoed in his mind, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. "I am not what you think I am." And deep down, he knew one thing for certain, this was only the beginning. The settlement was a small, struggling colony on the edge of human space. It was a place where people came to escape the wars and chaos of the inner systems, but life here was far from easy. The air was thin, the soil was barren, and the only source of water was a single, half-frozen river that ran through the center of the colony. The people who lived here were tough and resourceful, but even they had their limits. The older man led the scavengers back to the colony, the machine following silently behind them. The sight of the strange, humanoid figure caused a stir among the colonists. People gathered in the streets, their eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Children peeked out from behind their parents, while others whispered to each other, speculating about the machine's origins. "What is that thing?" one of the colonists asked, his voice trembling. "Is it dangerous?" The older man didn't answer. He was too busy trying to figure out what to do next. He had brought the machine back to the colony, but now he wasn't sure if that had been the right decision. The machine had saved them from the alien raiders, but it was still a mystery, and mysteries could be dangerous. He decided to take the machine to the colony's workshop, a small, run-down building at the edge of the settlement. It was the only place where they could study the machine without causing a panic. The workshop was filled with tools and spare parts, most of them scavenged from the wreckage of old ships. The older man cleared a space in the center of the room and gestured for the machine to sit down. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to figure out what you are." The machine obeyed, its movements smooth and precise. It sat down on the floor, its glowing eyes fixed on the older man. There was something about its gaze that made him uneasy, as if it could see right through him. As the older man began to examine the machine, his mind wandered back to his past. He had been a soldier once, fighting in a war that had cost him everything. He had lost his family, his home, and his sense of purpose. All that was left was the guilt and the memories, haunting him like ghosts. He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not now. There was too much at stake. The machine remained silent as the older man worked, its eyes never leaving him. It didn't resist or protest, but there was a sense of awareness in its movements, as if it understood everything that was happening. Hours passed, and the older man was no closer to understanding the machine. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its technology far beyond anything humans had ever created. The symbols on its chest were still a mystery, their meaning lost to time. Just as he was about to give up, the machine spoke again. "I am not what you think I am." The older man froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Then what are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The machine didn't answer. Instead, it stood up and walked to the window, its gaze fixed on the horizon. The older man followed its gaze, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a group of figures approaching the colony. They were alien raiders, their weapons glinting in the dim light. The older man's heart sank. He had hoped they would have more time, but it seemed the raiders had found them. He turned to the machine, his voice urgent. "Can you help us?" The machine didn't respond, but its eyes glowed brighter as it stepped outside. The older man followed, his mind racing. He didn't know what the machine was capable of, but he had no other choice. The colony was outnumbered and outgunned, and without the machine's help, they didn't stand a chance. As the raiders approached, the machine moved with a speed and precision that took everyone by surprise. It dodged bullets and struck with deadly accuracy, its movements fluid and effortless. The older man watched in awe, his heart pounding in his chest. The machine was a force of nature, a weapon unlike anything he had ever seen. But even as the machine fought, the older man couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just a weapon. Its movements were too deliberate, too calculated. It wasn't just fighting, it was protecting. When the battle was over, the raiders lay defeated, their bodies scattered across the ground. The machine stood in the center of the battlefield, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. The older man approached it cautiously, his mind filled with questions. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What are you?" The machine turned to him, its gaze steady and unwavering. "I am the last memory of a forgotten world." The older man didn't know what to say. The machine's words were cryptic, but they carried a weight that he couldn't ignore. He knew one thing for certain, the machine was more than just a weapon. It was a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved. And he was determined to find the answers. The colony was in chaos. The attack by the alien raiders had left everyone on edge, and the presence of the machine only added to the tension. Some saw it as a savior, a protector sent to defend them. Others saw it as a threat, a dangerous weapon that could turn on them at any moment. The older man knew he had to find answers, and soon. He spent the next few days studying the machine, trying to decipher the symbols on its chest and understand its purpose. The machine remained silent for the most part, but every now and then, it would speak, its voice calm and measured. "I am not what you think I am." The words echoed in the older man's mind, a constant reminder of the mystery he was trying to unravel. One night, as he sat alone in the workshop, the machine suddenly activated. Its eyes glowed brighter, and a holographic image appeared in the air before it. The older man stared in awe as the image shifted and changed, showing scenes from a distant past. There were cities, vast and beautiful, filled with people and machines working together in harmony. But then came the war, a conflict so devastating that it wiped out entire civilizations. The older man watched in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was seeing. "Is this your past?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The machine nodded, its gaze fixed on the holographic images. "I was created to protect, not to destroy. But the war changed everything. My creators are gone, and I am the last of my kind." The older man felt a pang of sadness. He had lost so much in his own life, and now he was face to face with a being that had lost everything. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "Why did you follow us?" The machine turned to him, its eyes glowing with a soft, blue light. "Because you are the key. You are the one who can help me fulfill my purpose." The older man frowned, confused. "What do you mean? What is your purpose?" The machine didn't answer right away. Instead, it showed him another image, a map of the galaxy, with a single star system highlighted. "This is where we must go. There is something there, something that can help us both." The older man studied the map, his mind racing. The star system was far away, on the other side of the galaxy. It would be a dangerous journey, but he knew he had no choice. The machine's words had struck a chord deep within him, and he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We'll go. But first, we need to prepare. The colony needs to be ready for whatever comes next." The machine nodded, its gaze steady and unwavering. "I will help you." Over the next few days, the older man worked tirelessly to prepare the colony for the journey. He gathered supplies, repaired the ships, and trained the colonists to defend themselves. The machine helped where it could, its advanced technology proving invaluable. But even as they worked, the older man couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, the older man stood outside the workshop, staring up at the stars. The machine joined him, its presence calm and reassuring. "Do you think we'll make it?" the older man asked, his voice tinged with doubt. The machine didn't answer right away. Instead, it looked up at the sky, its eyes glowing softly. "The journey will be difficult, but we must try. The future depends on it." The older man nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he also knew he couldn't turn back. The machine had given him a purpose, a reason to keep going. And for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. But that hope was short-lived. As they prepared to leave, a new threat emerged. A massive alien ship appeared in the sky, its dark silhouette blotting out the stars. The older man's heart sank as he recognized the symbol on the ship's hull. It was the mark of the alien warlord, a ruthless conqueror who had been hunting the machine for years. The warlord's voice boomed across the colony, cold and menacing. "Give me the machine, and I will spare your lives. Resist, and you will be destroyed." The older man turned to the machine, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do we do?" The machine's eyes glowed brighter, its voice calm but firm. "We fight. But remember, I am not what you think I am." The older man nodded, his mind racing. He knew the battle ahead would be the hardest of his life, but he also knew he couldn't give up. The machine had given him a purpose, and he was determined to see it through. As the alien ship descended, the older man and the machine stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were in this together. The alien warlord's ship loomed over the colony like a dark cloud, its massive shadow swallowing the land below. The colonists stared up in fear, their faces pale and their hands trembling. The older man stood at the front, his eyes fixed on the ship. He had faced many enemies in his life, but none as terrifying as this. The warlord's voice echoed across the colony once more, cold and unyielding. This is your final warning. Hand over the machine, or face annihilation. The older man clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew the warlord wasn't bluffing. The alien had a reputation for destroying entire worlds to get what he wanted. But the older man also knew he couldn't give up the machine. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a guardian, a protector. And it had given him something he thought he had lost forever: hope. He turned to the machine, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. What do we do? The machine's eyes glowed brighter, its voice calm but firm. We fight. But we must be smart. The warlord is powerful, but he is not invincible. The older man nodded, his resolve hardening. He turned to the colonists, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Listen to me. We can't give up now. This machine isn't just a weapon, it's our only chance to survive. If we stand together, we can fight back. But we have to be brave. We have to believe in each other. The colonists hesitated, their fear palpable. But then, one by one, they began to nod, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. They were scared, but they were also tired of running. They were ready to fight. The older man turned back to the machine. What's the plan? The machine's eyes flickered as it processed the question. The warlord's ship is heavily armed, but it has a weakness. Its power source is vulnerable. If we can disable it, we can ground the ship and level the playing field. The older man frowned. And how do we do that? The machine paused, its gaze steady. We need to get inside the ship. The older man's heart sank. Getting inside the warlord's ship would be nearly impossible. It was heavily guarded, and the warlord himself was a formidable opponent. But he knew they had no other choice. All right, he said, his voice firm. We'll do it. But we'll need a distraction. The machine nodded. I can create a diversion. While the warlord's forces are focused on me, you and a small team can infiltrate the ship. The older man hesitated. What about you? You'll be outnumbered. The machine's eyes glowed softly. I am not what you think I am. I can handle myself. The older man wanted to argue, but he knew there was no time. The warlord's ship was descending, and the colony was running out of options. He turned to the colonists, calling out a small group of volunteers. They were scared, but they were also determined. They knew what was at stake. As the machine moved to the center of the colony, the older man and his team prepared to make their move. The machine's eyes glowed brighter, and a loud, piercing sound filled the air. The warlord's forces turned their attention to the machine, their weapons raised. The older man and his team moved quickly, using the chaos to their advantage. They slipped through the shadows, making their way toward the warlord's ship. The older man's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay focused. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. As they reached the ship, the older man turned to his team. Remember, we're not here to fight. We're here to disable the power source. Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this. The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They moved inside the ship, their footsteps silent against the cold, metal floor. The older man led the way, his mind racing as he tried to remember the machine's instructions. But as they moved deeper into the ship, they realized they weren't alone. The warlord's guards were everywhere, their weapons at the ready. The older man's heart sank. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Just as they were about to be discovered, the machine's voice echoed in the older man's mind. I am with you. Trust me. The older man took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He knew they had no other choice. They had to keep going. As they reached the ship's power core, the older man and his team worked quickly, disabling the systems one by one. The ship began to shake, the lights flickering as the power source was disrupted. Outside, the machine continued to hold off the warlord's forces, its movements swift and precise. But even it had its limits. The older man knew they were running out of time. As the power core finally shut down, the ship began to descend, its systems failing. The older man and his team made their way back to the entrance, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they reached the exit, they were confronted by the warlord himself. He was a towering figure, his eyes cold and merciless. The older man froze, his mind racing. They were so close, but now they were face to face with their greatest enemy. The warlord's voice was low and menacing. You think you can defeat me? You are nothing but insects. The older man clenched his fists, his fear giving way to anger. We're not afraid of you. The warlord laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Then you will die braver than most. As the warlord raised his weapon, the older man braced himself for the end. But then, the machine appeared, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. It stepped between the older man and the warlord, its voice calm but firm. You will not harm them. The warlord's eyes narrowed. You are just a machine. You cannot stop me. The machine's gaze was steady. I am not what you think I am. And with that, the battle began. The warlord's ship shook violently as the power core failed, its systems sputtering and dying. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the metal walls. The older man and his team stood frozen, their eyes locked on the machine as it faced the warlord. The tension in the air was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. The warlord sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can stop me, machine? You are nothing but a relic of a dead world. The machine's eyes glowed brighter, its voice calm but firm. I am not what you think I am. Without warning, the warlord lunged forward, his weapon crackling with energy. The machine moved with lightning speed, dodging the attack and countering with a strike of its own. The two clashed in a blur of motion, their movements too fast for the older man to follow. We need to get out of here, one of the team members shouted, his voice trembling. The older man hesitated, his eyes fixed on the machine. He wanted to help, but he knew he would only be a liability in a fight like this. Reluctantly, he nodded. Go. Get back to the colony and prepare for the worst. I'll stay and help the machine. The team didn't argue. They turned and ran, their footsteps echoing down the corridor. The older man stayed behind, his heart pounding as he watched the battle unfold. The machine and the warlord were evenly matched, their blows shaking the ship with each impact. The warlord was strong, his attacks fueled by rage and hatred. But the machine was precise, its movements calculated and efficient. It fought not out of anger, but out of a sense of duty. The older man's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to help. He spotted a fallen weapon on the ground and grabbed it, his hands trembling as he aimed it at the warlord. He fired, but the shot bounced harmlessly off the warlord's armor. The warlord turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the older man. You dare interfere? Before the older man could react, the warlord struck, sending him flying across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening thud, his vision blurring as pain shot through his body. He struggled to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. The machine stepped in front of him, its voice calm but urgent. Stay down. I will handle this. The older man wanted to argue, but he knew the machine was right. He was in no condition to fight. He watched helplessly as the machine and the warlord clashed once more, their battle shaking the ship to its core. As the fight raged on, the older man noticed something strange. The machine's movements were becoming slower, its strikes less precise. Its glowing eyes flickered, as if it were running out of power. "What's happening?" the older man asked, his voice weak. The machine didn't answer. Instead, it focused all its energy on the warlord, its attacks growing more desperate. The warlord noticed the change and laughed, his voice cold and cruel. "You're weakening, machine. You can't keep this up forever." The machine's eyes flickered again, its voice barely audible. "I am not what you think I am." With a final burst of energy, the machine struck the warlord with a powerful blow, sending him crashing to the ground. The warlord groaned, his body twitching as he struggled to stand. But before he could recover, the machine turned to the older man, its voice urgent. "You must leave. Now." The older man shook his head, his voice trembling. "I'm not leaving you." The machine's eyes glowed softly, its voice filled with a strange sadness. "You must. My time is almost up. But I will ensure your safety." Before the older man could respond, the machine activated a hidden mechanism in the ship. A loud alarm blared, and the walls began to close in, sealing off the room. The older man realized what was happening. The machine was sacrificing itself to trap the warlord. "No," the older man shouted, his voice breaking. "You can't do this." The machine's gaze was steady, its voice calm but firm. "This is my purpose. To protect. To preserve. You must live, for the future depends on you." The older man's eyes filled with tears as the walls closed in, separating him from the machine. He pounded on the metal, his voice raw with emotion. "You're not just a machine. You're. But the words caught in his throat as the ship shook violently, the power core finally giving out. The older man was thrown to the ground, his vision fading as the ship began to collapse around him. The last thing he saw was the machine's glowing eyes, filled with a quiet determination. And then, everything went dark. The older man woke to the sound of voices. His body ached, and his vision was blurry, but he could make out the faces of the colonists hovering over him. They looked relieved, their eyes filled with concern. "You're alive," one of them said, his voice trembling. "We thought we lost you." The older man groaned as he tried to sit up, his mind still foggy. "The machine, where is it?" The colonists exchanged uneasy glances, their silence speaking volumes. The older man's heart sank as the memories came flooding back, the battle, the warlord, the machine's sacrifice. He clenched his fists, his eyes filling with tears. "We found you near the wreckage of the warlord's ship," one of the colonists explained. "The ship was destroyed, and the warlord, there was no sign of him. But the machine, it's gone." The older man's chest tightened, a wave of grief washing over him. The machine had given its life to save them, to protect the colony. And now it was gone, leaving behind only questions and regrets. As the colonists helped him to his feet, the older man noticed something strange. In his hand, he was clutching a small, metallic object, a data chip. He stared at it, his mind racing. The machine must have given it to him before the walls closed in. "What is that?" one of the colonists asked, his voice filled with curiosity. The older man didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the workshop, his steps slow but determined. The colonists followed, their eyes fixed on the data chip. When they reached the workshop, the older man inserted the chip into a console. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of symbols and images. The colonists gathered around, their breaths held as they waited for something to happen. Then, the machine's voice filled the room, calm and steady. "If you are hearing this, it means I have fulfilled my purpose. I am sorry I could not say goodbye in person, but there was no time. This message contains the information you need to continue the journey." The older man's heart pounded as he listened, his eyes fixed on the screen. The machine's voice continued, its words filled with a quiet urgency. The warlord is gone, but the threat remains. There are others like him, and they will not stop until they have destroyed everything. You must go to the star system I showed you. There, you will find the answers you seek. The screen displayed a map of the galaxy, with a single star system highlighted. The older man recognized it immediately. It was the same system the machine had shown him before. This is where my creators once lived, the machine's voice explained. They left behind a legacy, a gift for those who would come after. It is a place of hope, but also of danger. You must be careful. The older man's mind raced as he tried to process the information. The machine's creators had left something behind, something powerful. But what was it? And why had the machine chosen him to find it? The machine's voice grew softer, its tone filled with a strange sadness. I am not what you think I am. I was never just a machine. I was a guardian, a protector. And now, that duty falls to you. The older man's eyes filled with tears as the message ended, the screen going dark. He sat in silence, his mind reeling. The machine had given him a purpose, a mission. But it had also left him with a heavy burden. The colonists watched him, their faces filled with a mix of awe and fear. What do we do now? One of them asked, his voice trembling. The older man took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. We prepare. We gather supplies, repair the ships, and get ready for the journey. The machine gave its life to protect us, and we owe it to them to see this through. The colonists nodded, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew they couldn't turn back. The machine had given them a chance, and they were determined to make the most of it. As the colonists began to work, the older man stayed behind, staring at the darkened screen. He thought about the machine's words, its final message echoing in his mind. I am not what you think I am. The older man clenched his fists, his heart filled with a quiet determination. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would honor the machine's sacrifice. He would find the answers, no matter the cost. And he would make sure the machine's legacy lived on. The colony buzzed with activity as the colonists worked tirelessly to prepare for the journey. Ships were repaired, supplies were gathered, and weapons were checked and rechecked. The older man moved among them, his presence a steadying force. He had taken on the role of leader, not because he wanted to, but because he knew it was what the machine would have wanted. As he oversaw the preparations, his mind kept returning to the machine's final message. I am not what you think I am. The words haunted him, a constant reminder of the mystery he was trying to unravel. He didn't know what he would find in the star system the machine had shown him, but he knew he had to try. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the older man stood alone outside the workshop, staring up at the stars. The weight of his responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he forced himself to stay focused. He couldn't afford to falter, not now. A soft voice broke the silence. Are you okay? The older man turned to see one of the colonists, a young woman with kind eyes and a determined expression. She had been one of the first to volunteer for the journey, and her courage had inspired many others. I'm fine, the older man said, his voice quiet. Just thinking. The young woman nodded, her gaze thoughtful. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? The machine, it changed everything. The older man sighed, his eyes returning to the stars. It did. But I still don't understand why it chose me. I'm just an old man with too many regrets. The young woman stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe it saw something in you that you don't see in yourself. Maybe it knew you were the one who could carry on its mission. The older man didn't respond, but her words struck a chord deep within him. He had spent so long dwelling on his past, on the mistakes he had made and the people he had lost. But the machine had given him a chance to start over, to make a difference. And he couldn't let that chance go to waste. The next morning, the older man gathered the colonists together, his voice steady as he addressed them. "We leave in 2 days. The journey will be dangerous, and there's no guarantee we'll find what we're looking for. But we owe it to the machine, and to ourselves, to try. We've been given a chance to change our future, and we can't let fear stop us." The colonists listened in silence, their faces filled with determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. The machine had given them hope, and they were determined to see its mission through. As the final preparations were made, the older man found himself drawn to the workshop once more. He stood before the console, staring at the data chip the machine had left behind. He inserted it into the console, and the screen flickered to life, displaying the map of the star system. The machine's voice filled the room, calm and steady. "The journey ahead will not be easy, but you are not alone. You carry the legacy of my creators, and the hope of a better future. Remember, I am not what you think I am. I am a guardian, a protector. And now, so are you." The older man's eyes filled with tears as the message ended, the screen going dark. He clenched his fists, his heart filled with a quiet determination. The machine had given him a purpose, a mission. And he would see it through, no matter the cost. As the colonists boarded the ships, the older man took one last look at the colony. It had been his home for so long, but now it was time to leave. He climbed aboard the lead ship, his mind focused on the journey ahead. The engines roared to life, and the ships lifted off, soaring into the sky. The older man stared out the window, his heart pounding as the stars grew closer. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would honor the machine's sacrifice. He would find the answers, no matter the cost. And he would make sure the machine's legacy lived on. The journey to the star system was long and fraught with danger. The ships traveled through uncharted space, their engines straining as they pushed forward. The older man spent most of his time in the lead ship's cockpit, his eyes fixed on the stars. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something was waiting for them. The colonists worked tirelessly to keep the ships running, their determination unwavering. But as the days turned into weeks, the strain began to show. Supplies were running low, and the constant threat of attack weighed heavily on everyone's minds. One evening, as the older man sat alone in the cockpit, the young woman who had spoken to him before approached. She looked tired, but her eyes were filled with determination. "We're getting close, aren't we?" she asked, her voice quiet. The older man nodded, his gaze fixed on the star system ahead. "Yes. But I don't know what we'll find when we get there." The young woman sat down beside him, her expression thoughtful. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. The machine believed in us, and we have to believe in ourselves." The older man didn't respond, but her words gave him a glimmer of hope. He knew they were in this together, and that gave him strength. As they approached the star system, the ship's sensors began to pick up strange readings. There were energy signatures unlike anything they had ever seen, and the older man's heart sank as he realized what it meant. "We're not alone," he said, his voice grim. "There's something out there." The colonists braced themselves as the ships entered the star system, their hearts pounding. The older man's eyes widened as they approached a massive structure floating in space. It was ancient and imposing, its surface covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. "This is it," the older man said, his voice filled with awe. "This is what the machine wanted us to find." But before they could get closer, the sensors picked up a new threat. A fleet of alien ships appeared on the horizon, their weapons trained on the colonists' ships. The older man's heart sank as he recognized the markings on the ships. They belonged to the warlord's allies. "We're outnumbered," one of the colonists said, his voice trembling. "What do we do?" The older man clenched his fists, his mind racing. They had come too far to turn back now. He turned to the colonists, his voice steady despite the fear in his heart. "We fight," he said. "We've come this far, and we're not giving up. The machine believed in us, and we have to believe in ourselves. We'll face whatever comes our way, together." The colonists nodded, their expressions shifting from fear to determination. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew they couldn't give up. The machine had given them a chance, and they were determined to see it through. As the alien ships closed in, the older man took control of the lead ship, his hands steady on the controls. He maneuvered the ship through the chaos, dodging enemy fire and returning fire when he could. The colonists fought bravely, their determination unwavering. But the enemy was strong, and the colonists were outnumbered. Just when it seemed like all was lost, the ancient structure began to activate. The symbols on its surface glowed brighter, and a powerful energy beam shot out, striking the enemy ships. The older man's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The structure was defending them, using the same technology the machine had used. It was a guardian, just like the machine. "We're not alone," the older man said, his voice filled with awe. "The machine's creators, they're still here." The colonists watched in awe as the structure continued to attack the enemy ships, its power unmatched. The older man's heart pounded as he realized what this meant. The machine's creators had left behind a legacy, a gift for those who would come after. As the last of the enemy ships were destroyed, the older man turned to the colonists, his voice filled with determination. "We've found what we came for. Now, we have to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." The colonists nodded, their expressions filled with resolve. They knew the journey wasn't over, but they also knew they had a chance to make a difference. The machine's legacy lived on, and they were determined to protect it. The ancient structure floated silently in space, its glowing symbols casting an eerie light over the colonists' ships. The older man stood in the cockpit, staring at the massive structure with a mix of awe and reverence. They had found it, the legacy of the machine's creators. But now, the real work began. The colonists worked quickly to establish a connection with the structure, their hands trembling with excitement and fear. The older man oversaw the operation, his mind racing as he tried to understand what they were dealing with. The structure was ancient, its technology far beyond anything they had ever seen. But it was also familiar, a reminder of the machine that had brought them here. As the connection was established, the structure began to transmit data to the ships. The older man watched in silence as the information flooded the screens, his heart pounding with anticipation. There were schematics, historical records, and something else, a message. The machine's voice filled the cockpit, calm and steady. "You have found what I could not. This structure is the last remnant of my creators, a testament to their hopes and dreams. It is a gift, but also a responsibility. You must protect it, and use it wisely." The older man's eyes filled with tears as he listened, the weight of the machine's words pressing heavily on his heart. He had come so far, faced so many challenges, and now he was being asked to carry on the legacy of a civilization that no longer existed. The young woman who had stood by his side throughout the journey approached, her voice quiet but firm. "What do we do now?" The older man took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We learn. We study the technology, and we use it to protect ourselves and others. But we also remember the lessons the machine taught us. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a guardian, a protector. And now, that's what we have to be." The colonists nodded, their expressions filled with determination. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew they had a chance to make a difference. The machine's legacy lived on, and they were determined to honor it. As the days turned into weeks, the colonists began to unlock the secrets of the structure. They discovered new technologies, new ways to protect themselves and others. But they also discovered something else, a deeper understanding of the machine's purpose. The older man spent hours studying the records, his mind filled with questions. He learned about the machine's creators, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. He learned about the wars they had fought, and the mistakes they had made. And he learned about the machine, its true purpose, and why it had chosen him. One evening, as the sun set over the colony they had established near the structure, the older man stood alone, staring up at the stars. His heart was heavy with the weight of everything he had learned, but also filled with a quiet hope. The young woman approached, her voice gentle. "Are you okay?" The older man nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. "I'm just thinking about the machine. It gave us so much, but it also asked so much of us. I don't know if I can live up to its legacy." The young woman smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "You already have. The machine believed in you, and so do we. You've led us this far, and you'll lead us further. We're in this together." The older man's eyes filled with tears as he realized she was right. The machine had given him a purpose, a mission. But it had also given him something else, a family. The colonists were more than just his companions, they were his responsibility, his legacy. As he stood there, staring up at the stars, the older man felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The machine's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the journey they had taken and the lessons they had learned. "I am not what you think I am." The older man smiled, his heart filled with gratitude. The machine had been more than just a machine, it had been a guardian, a protector, and a teacher. And now, it was up to him to carry on its legacy. As the stars twinkled above, the older man made a silent promise. He would protect the structure, and the knowledge it contained. He would lead the colonists, and teach them the lessons the machine had taught him. And he would make sure the machine's legacy lived on, not just in the technology they had discovered, but in the hearts and minds of those who would come after. The final line of the story echoed in his mind, a reminder of the journey they had taken and the lessons they had learned. It refused to call itself a warrior, because its true purpose was to remind us what it means to be human.